Welcome to the Let's Talk Kids Health Facebook Live Show, episode 23. I'm Dr. Narissa Bauer, your host. I'm a behavioral pediatrician and blogger of Let's Talk Kids Health. As you know, the concept of this show is to share information about behavioral health and wellness for children and families everywhere. Each week, I plan to bring you topics and guests to help me advance this mission so that we can all talk together. Now, remember, if you're viewing this live, you'll have the opportunity to post comments and ask questions of my guest. Let us know that you're here anytime by dropping a comment, saying hello, and using hashtag live. The replay will be immediately available when we end the broadcast. So you know, if you're watching or listening and saying, I think so-and-so would really enjoy this episode, please share, because sharing is caring. And if you don't want to miss future episodes or maybe check out the past ones, please subscribe to my YouTube channel, Narissa Bauer MD, and follow my blog Facebook page, Let's Talk Kids Health. Okay, so now on to this week's guest. Let's welcome Dr. Elena Shea. Dr. Shea is a mother of 3, soon to be 4, and a general pediatrician who is working outside of Washington, D.C. in Northern Virginia. After graduating from Yale University with a Bachelor of Arts in History, she went on to Tufts University School of Medicine, where she completed her medical training. She moved to Washington, D.C. for a pediatric residency at Georgetown University Hospital. She's passionate about providing quality, evidence-based care for her patients. She loves providing new parents with quality breastfeeding support and information, and is awaiting her test results for her International Board of Certified Lactation Consultant exam, which we'll learn more about here shortly. She's an avid reader who is working to promote early childhood and adult literacy. Thanks for coming onto this show, Dr. Shea. I'm so glad to, have you on.
Thank you so much for having me. It's such a pleasure to be here and talk about these topics with you.
Yes, and I know how passionate you are about these two things, so I cannot wait to sort of get you talking on these things, because these are so important.
I apologize if I go on. Feel free to cut me off at any point.
Well, so, can you tell me a little bit about, what is, I'm going to just start here and then kind of ask you a couple other questions. But, I did talk about what is an International Board Certified Lactation Consultant, and why would a pediatrician like yourself continue to go on and study this and do this?
Well, so an IBCLC is a certification, an international certification that you can get that sort of states that you've done extra learning and extra training in breastfeeding. It requires 90 hours of education plus 1,000 hours of clinical, time spent with mothers and babies, plus this exam that is offered twice a year. And so it's kind of the same requirements all over the world. And it's a nice sort of standardized level that you can get to with comes to sort of breastfeeding education and support and whatnot. For me personally, I think it's really important because I spend all day seeing babies and moms, and a lot of women, I think, struggle with breastfeeding, especially at the beginning, and they don't necessarily have the support or the know-how about what they're doing. So I think being a pediatrician and being a breastfeeding medicine provider kind of go hand in hand, because you can really help them, reach whatever goals they happen to have. And so, as sort of pediatricians everywhere, we support breastfeeding, we support healthy moms, healthy babies. And I think knowing more about the topic really helps me then be able to provide good care for my patients. And then also this is one of those topics that you don't hear or learn anything about in residency. So until I had my own children, I was just like, oh, breastfeeding, it's so easy. It's so, everyone can do it. It's not a big deal. And then I had my children and I was like, wait a second, this is totally not, the easy peasy, just put the baby on type of thing that we're kind of taught to think it is. So I think for me personally, it's been very satisfying to be able to then take what I've learned and help moms who may be in the same position I was 4 years ago with my oldest and had no clue what I was doing.
Yeah. I mean, when you said that, I kind of thought back to my own experience. Like, my oldest is 14 now. Mm-hmm. And I remember thinking, oh, I've helped other moms. It's so easy. They just latch on. And then it's like, ugh, you feel so awkward. You're like, how do I hold? And,
right.
Position.
And And it's amazing because with my oldest, it was kind of like the perfect storm of he was little, he's a boy, which sometimes is a bit difficult. He had a kind of a small mouth. I didn't know what I was doing at all because I was like, oh, I know, like, I didn't read anything about it. I was totally, cocky about it. And we struggled, and it took us, a couple months to get a good sort of working breastfeeding relationship. And I was pumping and it was a whole mess. And so now I think I definitely appreciate the struggles that other moms that before I kind of probably would have been like, oh, it's okay. It's okay. Like, don't worry about it. It'll work out. Now I'm like, oh, well, no, like, let's really dig into what's going on. And I'm very grateful to have had the opportunity to learn all this extra stuff to then be able to help my patients and, help women out there who might need some extra help.
Yeah, I bet your families really appreciate that expertise
Yeah.
that you are able to
I
bring.
hope so. I hope
Yeah.
so. I hope that they, benefit from it.
Yeah, so I guess that's a great segue to our next question. I mean, what are the types of breastfeeding issues that you can help with?
So, and there's, like I said, there's multiple layers of sort of certifications you can get to help breastfeeding moms and babies. And the IBCLC is kind of like the top one, but any, qualified lactation consultant should be able to help with the basics, getting a good latch, getting a good position, making sure it doesn't hurt, making sure that everything's kind of working the way it's supposed to be. And then, if you've seen a lactation consultant and you're still having issues, that's when we usually say, well, move on to an MD IBCLC or an IBCLC who may have more experience, because there's other stuff that can be going on that's a bit more complex. But everyone, I feel like, should have access to at least someone who can watch you nurse and make sure that it's not painful, that it's working, that you're not running risks of infections and, babies growing and all that sort of stuff. So it's a nice sort of extra resource, I think, for new moms to make sure that everything is going the way they want it to go, because we don't want anyone to be struggling and in pain and, feeling sort of just in despair because things aren't working the way they should.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, absolutely. And as a pediatrician, it's really important those first 100 days really to promote
Mm-hmm.
that bonding, that attachment, and
Mm-hmm.
getting proper sleep and nutrition and that stress of just assuming this new
Mm-hmm.
role. And if
Yep.
feeding isn't going right, right?
Yeah, I've definitely seen it. I've experienced it personally, and then in my practice with my patients, how, all those things combine to kind of create the perfect storm of, mental health distress and life distress. And all of a sudden, they're tired and you're struggling and you feel alone because you have a new baby, and then you're feeling sad, and like it all just kind of builds on each other. And I think, trying to get to moms before it gets to that point is so important, which is why it's so important to have doctors out there who are sort of knowledgeable about breastfeeding and postpartum depression and, normal sleep and normal kid behaviors too. And being able to tell parents, like, it's okay. This is normal. This is you. Like, it's going to be okay.
Hmm.
And this is what we can do to make sure that you get to that point so that things don't get worse. Right.
Yeah, yeah. I love that you went over and beyond to go and seek that certification because I think, again, like you said, you're just really poised to do that because you're
Right.
seeing them in the context of all those well child visits.
Right. Right. And I mean, from what, and a lot of people say, like, oh, as an MD, you don't need to do that extra certification. But I think it's important to have taken the time, like you said, to learn all this extra stuff and do all these hours, um, and sort of tell people, like, I care enough about it to have gone that extra step because I think it's important.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Well, can we transition then to your other passionate,
Sure.
passion about literacy? Like, how did you get involved in this and
I mean,
personally?
I grew up surrounded by books. So my mom is a passionate reader. She, is the type of person who always had a book on her. And I think my brothers and I just grew up sort of surrounded with this reading is fun, reading is great, like, you should read, you should read. And I naturally just am sort of drawn to books. I love to read. I'm a big book nerd. And I was definitely the kid who always, again, had like a book in my bag, was always reading something like, and so as I've gotten bigger, I just naturally like talking about, books and literacy and whatnot. And then again, when I had my children, I started reading a little bit more about like the importance of having books in the home and reading to your children from a young age, and all the amazing things that happen in their brains when they're just sitting in your lap and you're reading, Goodnight Moon for the 800th time, like, all the connections and all these amazing things that happen for a lifetime from just those 20 minutes that you spend with them, every day. And so I think it's such a great thing, and it's such an easy, intervention that we can do to help kids who may not have other opportunities to, advance. Like giving parents books and having them read with their children is so easy and cheap and so beneficial to like everybody.
Yeah. I mean, can you just reiterate for those watching or listening, from your perspective as a pediatrician, as well as, a mom, why
Mhm.
is literacy so important, and why do pediatricians care so much about it?
So I think there's been a lot of research done in the last few years, sort of about what happens to our brains when we are read to, in particular, and how reading to a child, even if they can't read themselves. So I'm talking like to, newborns, toddlers, preschool age kids, how their brains change just from being read to, and how those changes in their brains help them then go on to have more success in school and more success in professional lives. So again, it's stuff that you do when they're babies that really does affect them their whole lives. And I think as a pediatrician, since our goal is to raise happy, healthy, successful children and protect them and give them as much advantages as we can, I think it's important then to tell parents that, be like, hey, 10 minutes a day of reading a book, even if you're just pointing at pictures, like can help your baby have so much more, such a bigger advantage than not doing, right? And I was reading a paper that was talking about how if you read one book a day to your child from when they're babies, they enter kindergarten having heard more than 500,000 more words than someone who hasn't been read to. And you're like, oh, that's not, but you're like, 500,000 words is a lot of words. So it puts these kindergartners again at, just a slight advantage that then keeps going. And I think it's important, for pediatricians to share that information with their patients, because a lot of parents may not think of it that way. They're like, oh, reading, like, they're not big readers. They didn't grow up in households that were big readers. And so they don't think about it as something that they should do to their babies or to their toddlers. It's, oh, it's something you do when they're school age. But no, it's starting just, when they're so little, it has such a big advantage to everybody. And then there's the connection and the cuddling and the bonding that happens when you read to your kids. It's, wonderful too.
Yeah. I mean, what do you say when you encounter maybe a parent who has problems themselves with reading, and they may be a little bit embarrassed about it, or they're just not
Right.
sure? Like, how can you overcome that with that family?
So, I mean, and that's a really good question, because I work primarily with, recent immigrants from like Latin America who aren't fluent in English. A lot of them don't read even Spanish that well.
Hmm.
And so I get that a lot. I'm like, oh, you should read your kids. And they're like, well, we're not the best readers. And I was like, it doesn't matter as much that you're reading the actual text as it matters as much that you are taking the time to sit with your kid and you can look at a picture book and make up a story, right? Like your 2-year-old doesn't know that you're not reading the actual words, right? But you can make something up with the pictures, or you can just talk to them about the pictures, or, have someone, maybe read you the book, and then you can, like there's lots of other ways to kind of go around, because the point isn't so much the actual like text of the book, it's the whole experience of being read to, and associating like what you're hearing with the pictures, and spending time with mom, and it's hard. And I know, because parents are very busy and they work multiple jobs and they may not have the chance to sit and do an hour. But, one book, one kid's book takes 5 minutes. If you can squeeze that in before bath time, then it's great. It's such a nice thing.
Yeah. I mean, I think we've touched on some of this, but are there any other ways that parents can promote literacy in the home?
So, I mean, the biggest way is just having books. And so, whether it's you buy them and have them on your shelves, whether you go to the library and check them out, for your kiddos, whatever it is, just showing them that books are something that's important is a great first step. And then, like I said, you don't have to read the actual books. Like, if you take the time and you're at a restaurant and you want to read the menu together, or you want to read the signs on the road, or show them, the newspaper and read stuff, like we read all the time. And so anything that's sort of showing kids it's important to read, I think is a good first step to promoting, kids who love to learn and love to read and love to continue on, forever. It's such a good, sort of self-care time, right? Like you pick up your book and kind of just go away to whatever you're reading, which
Yes.
I think is nice for kids to have that,
Yeah. Yeah, I do too. I mean, I was similar too. I was always sort of the one who would do the book challenges in the summer and had a book.
Oh,
Actually,
yeah.
I love going to the library and checking out
I still,
books.
it's, so we growing up never really were a library family. We went to like the bookstore and bought books. And
Uh-huh.
as an adult, I've discovered the library and I'm like, this is the most amazing place ever. And I'll like go and I, check out like 7 books. And then I'm like, oh, wow, this is great. And if I don't like them, it's okay because they're from the library. So I could just return them and I don't feel guilty that I
Yeah.
spent, $15 on a book that I was never going to read anyway.
Yeah. Yeah.
But yeah, doing story time at the library is great. Like modeling, right? So if you like to read, just taking, like showing them that you're reading is good because then they're like, oh, mommy reads. Like I'm going to read too. And then you can spend some time together doing that. I think is a good thing too.
Yeah, well, we have a comment. So from actually my very good friend Long Sanchez, she
Oh,
says
that,
she says that their baby, since 4 weeks old, really enjoys reading time, and we know he doesn't understand it yet, but he really pays attention.
yeah, that's totally, we don't, and I always tell parents, we don't know what kids understand and don't understand, but there's a lot in the whole time spent, with kids in your lap, looking at pictures, looking at stories, at expressions, listening to their parents' voices.
Hmm.
That's all kind of goes in together to this sort of early childhood literacy and raising kids who like to learn and like to read and stuff. And at when they're babies, everything is new to them, and so they get fascinated by just hearing your voice, looking at the pictures, being close to mommy. Like it's great, and it's a habit that continues. It's when you start little, that baby's going to be in your lap reading books when they're toddlers because it's part of your routine, which is
Yes.
great.
Yeah, which brings you, I mean, I'm glad you said that because routine is so important
Mm-hmm.
in early
Mm-hmm.
childhood, and it's such a great way to establish that bedtime routine.
Mm-hmm. Yep. I always tell parents because they again they're like, well, when could I'm like, just stick it in before nap and
Uh-huh.
bed, right? If you can do 1 or 2 books before naps and before bed, like that's 4 books a day that they may be getting, which is great, right? And if you can do longer, great. And if you can't, then that's fine too, right? Whatever you guys can work into your life, I think is better than nothing.
Right, right. Well, do you have any of recommendations for favorite books at different ages that you
Oh
like?
my gosh, so so many.
I know.
Um, so, I'm a big fan of for the little ones. So like, the babies, the young toddlers, so like 1, 2, any book that has that good repetition and rhyming is always good. So I mean, I'm a fan of We Read Goodnight Moon, which I said before, all the time. Um, we we read a lot of like corduroy, like I'm into the
Okay.
classics, right? Um, and then just whatever as they get bigger, you can do books that have a little bit more of a story. So like my oldest really loves dinosaurs. So we do like the Danny and the Dinosaur series because he loves them. He thinks they're really funny. Books with flaps, books. There's so many. I can't
Yes.
even.
Yeah.
we literally have hundreds of books, and like every day, it's like we're currently he loves. What are we reading currently? So I'm a consultant for Usborne Books and More, and they had a couple of new releases that were like the mixed up fairy tales or something, and so it's like one is like Jack and the Three Bears, and so like the stories get all hodgepodge together, and he just thinks it's the funniest thing because he's like, they're not in the right story, but like he thinks it's so funny, and I'm like, well, okay, read it like every night for a long, yeah.
Yeah, I
So
love that. I love that. And growing up, I don't know if you grew up on like Richard Scarry books, and all those
yeah,
different ones, but I'm dating
I'm
myself now.
I'm excited. I'm excited to have them be old enough to do some of the like Beverly Cleary,
Oh yeah.
like fudge books and like Ramona and some of those that are he's not quite there yet because he's only 4, but
Yeah.
soon. Part of me's like maybe I'll read them now anyway and we'll just deal with it.
Yeah, reading is so great. Reading is great with your kids. And I love that you pointed out that reading, exposure to language can really just the exposure of words, but not just the language itself, but the complexity of words too. And we
Mm-hmm.
know that when you're reading along with your child, you can do what we call dialogic reading, sort of building on utterances and
Mm-hmm.
helping expand those speech
Mm-hmm.
syllables and
Yeah.
phrases they use.
And that's definitely something that the research is showing too, that
Mm-hmm.
kiddos who are read to pick up so many new words, but also new ways of phrasing things and uses of different parts of, verbs and adverbs and stuff. And so their language is way more complex than a kiddo who doesn't have that exposure. And again, it's one of those things you think, well, if your 4-year-old is speaking in a complex way because they picked it up from books, like when they get to school, they're going to be, you know, a little bit ahead of the other kiddos. So things will be a little bit easier. There'll be less of a struggle, right? They'll be more passionate about learning in school, which is always a great thing, right? We want kids who like going to school and like learning.
Right.
But yeah, I think sometimes like my kids will say things, and I'm like, where did you learn that? I was like, oh, it's from the books, like some weird phrase or some way of saying something, and I'm like,
Uh-huh.
oh, okay, so all right.
Yeah. Well, so I guess, we talked about two really important topics that I think are really key in early childhood, breastfeeding as well as literacy. What word of advice would you have for parents, first time parents, or just parents out there who might be struggling either with breastfeeding or, literacy issues? I mean, what would be some advice that you would have for them?
I mean, I think it's sort of twofold. One is you're doing a great job. So I feel like there's so much pressure nowadays to be this perfect parent that does everything, and super put together, and their kids are super, super, superstars, and everything is so easy. And social media kind of perpetuates this idea that everyone else has it easier than you do. And so I always say you're doing great, right? Everything is going fine. Um, and if you are struggling, getting help is the best thing you can do. So if you're having issues, with breastfeeding, um, then speaking to your, pediatrician who can then hopefully point you in the direction of someone who can give you some help, or at least discuss what the issues are, because sometimes things that we think are issues actually aren't, if
Mm-hmm.
that makes sense. Because again, there's a lot of stuff out there about, what's the norm, but then it's really not the norm. It's just sort of like the social media norm. Um, and asking, well, what can I do? Like, how can I help my child? You know, how can we have a more successful breastfeeding, relationship or journey? Kiddos who might be struggling a little bit with literacy, like, what can we do to help them? Like, making sure that they're getting all the help they need, because, you know, we used to raise children in a village, and now we raise children kind of by ourselves. And I think sort of rebuilding this idea of there's other people out there to support you and to help you is so important, especially when you're a new mom, or you're a mom who lives, far away from her family, or whatnot.
Yeah, yeah, and especially the times that we live in, with right now through the pandemic, I think it's really highlighted the need for
Yeah.
just connection, human connection. We need that. We
Yep.
need, we can't do this alone.
And it's interesting because in some of the stuff you learn about when you're studying breastfeeding is how, 200 years ago, you would have a baby and be surrounded by your family, and you had grown up watching people breastfeed, and probably, you knew what to do because you saw it. You grew up seeing it. It was such a part of life. And nowadays, it's like the total opposite. Like now, there's all this controversy about breastfeeding in public, and people don't breastfeed in front of each other. And you grow up in your nuclear family, not with your extended family. And it's all these things. And I think that sort of highlights how, we're social creatures who are meant to all be together. And, we've sort of all kind of separated, I think. And I hope maybe after all this, resolves, people will kind of move back more into being more communal.
Yeah.
But we'll have to see.
Yeah, that'll be great. I mean, I think if anything, I certainly have really enjoyed slowly sort of reintegrating with everybody else now that the vaccine has rolled out and people are getting it. So
yeah, it's been great. I mean, we hadn't seen our extended family because we're in Virginia and my family lives in Florida and my husband lives in Colorado, and we hadn't seen my parents in like a year and a half. I still haven't seen my in-laws since before the pandemic, just because it's hard, it was hard enough living so far away, and now with everything else, we just haven't made it. They haven't made it here. We haven't made it there. And so it is hard. It's very hard.
yeah.
Luckily there's like FaceTime and stuff, so we can at least see everybody, so you don't feel quite so isolated.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, FaceTime technology, it's, there's good and not so good about it all, but
Yeah.
moderation is key. And
Yeah, I know. I totally agree.
yeah. Well, again, thank you. I had such a great time chatting with you, getting to know
Me
you,
too.
talking
This was
about
great.
this.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
I really appreciate you spending some time, especially in the evening when your kids are about ready to go to bed. So,
I don't know. I hear them upstairs. I don't know how soon bedtime will actually be. There's lots of running around.
Oh, well, it was really a pleasure to talk with you. And
Thank you.
yeah,
Thank you. Yeah, this was great.
thank you. And just to let you guys know, so my next guest for next week is Dr. Anu French, who will be talking to us about mindful art as a healing tool. And so I look forward to having that discussion with her. And then, as you know, some of you who are following my blog, I do a parenting book club. So again, it's my way of sort of trying to get people together to talk asynchronously on social media. And this month we are doing Anxiety Relief for Kids by Bridget Flynn Walker. You can always join anytime. Just join my Facebook group and jump on, look at Guide 9. The author has agreed to do a Facebook Live with me, so you can actually ask questions. And there's still time to read. So thanks again. And again, if you're watching the show and you have any topics that you want for me to highlight or guess, feel free to reach out to me by dropping me an email at letstalkkidshealth@gmail.com, messaging below, or just reaching out to me on social media. And remember to subscribe to my YouTube channel and blog Facebook page so that you'll be alerted each week when I go live. Dr. Shea, thanks so much for being on the show.
Thank you so much for having me. This was great.
All right, we'll talk again soon.